There are seasons in a human life when something quiet begins to shift. You sense it before you can name it, a restlessness beneath your routines, a thinning of the meanings that once held you, a faint pull away from the person you have been. It feels subtle at first, like a background discomfort you cannot quite locate. But slowly it grows. Slowly it asks to be acknowledged. This is the beginning of outgrowing your past. Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." His words echo softly through this experience. Because outgrowing your past is not a clean transformation. It is a tender unraveling. It is the quiet decision to let everything happen to you, even when you cannot yet understand what is shifting. People often imagine growth as something hopeful, something upward, something clear. But the truth is gentler and more complicated. Growth often begins with grief. Not loud grief, not dramatic grief, but a soft ache that follows you into the small moments. It appears when you wake up and realize that the life you once wanted no longer fits. It appears when the conversations you used to enjoy feel distant. It appears when the habits that once comforted you now leave you feeling empty. This grief is disorienting because nothing obvious has gone wrong. You are grieving something you cannot point to. You are grieving the person you used to be. You are grieving the identity that once felt solid. You are grieving the safety of knowing who you were. And you are grieving the illusion that life would remain predictable if only you tried hard enough. The grief of outgrowing your past does not announce itself. It moves quietly, like a tide pulling you away from familiar shores. At first you resist. You tell yourself that you should be grateful, that you should be satisfied, that nothing is missing. But underneath that insistence is the quiet truth that you have changed. And what once aligned with your heart no longer does. Rilke's words seem to anticipate this moment. The only journey is the one within. Outgrowing your past is not about external change at first. It is about the inner journey you cannot ignore anymore. The inner journey towards something more honest than your previous self could hold. We rarely talk about this kind of grief. We talk about loss when it involves another person, a relationship, a dream that collapsed. But we rarely acknowledge the loss of a former self, the version of you that once carried your hopes, the version of you that worked so hard to survive, the version of you that believed certain things because believing them was necessary. When you grow, you do not just gain. You also shed, and shedding is always a form of mourning. It is difficult to grieve a self that others still expect you to be. The people close to you may not understand your shift. They may still speak to the version of you who no longer exists. They may remind you of old preferences, old habits, old fears. Their memories become a kind of mirror, reflecting someone you have quietly begun to leave behind. This can create a strange loneliness, the loneliness of being unseen even by those who once knew you well. You might feel guilty for changing. You might feel as though you are betraying your old self or the people who loved that version of you. But growth is not betrayal. Growth is the natural unfolding of a life. The past self you are grieving was not meant to remain forever. It was one chapter of your becoming, and it served its purpose. Some parts supported you, some parts protected you, some parts limited you. All of them belong to a different season. As you grow, the structures that once held you begin to crack. The stories you told yourself lose their clarity. The goals that once motivated you lose their pull. You start questioning why you want what you want. You begin to hear a quiet voice beneath the noise of expectation. It speaks softly, asking you to pay attention. But listening requires courage. Because if you truly hear it, you may need to change your life. Here, another line from Rilke becomes a gentle guide. You must change your life. Not as pressure, not as demand, but as recognition. When the truth reveals itself, you cannot pretend not to see it. There is a subtle courage in acknowledging that your past is no longer your anchor. Many people try to force their lives back into shapes that no longer fit. They cling to old identities out of fear. They tell themselves that change is unnecessary, that discomfort is temporary, that certainty will return if only they wait. But the grief persists. It persists because it is trying to guide you. It is trying to show you that outgrowing your past is not a mistake. It is a sign of life. At first, you may feel torn, caught between where you were and where you have not yet arrived. You may find yourself revisiting old environments or habits, hoping they will still feel like home. But they do not. They feel different because you are different. Your inner landscape has shifted, and the external world can no longer match it. This mismatch is painful. It reveals that the distance between who you have been and who you are becoming is widening. In this space between selves, many people feel lost, but you are not lost. You are in transition, and transitions are always tender. They require patience, they require stillness, they require sitting with the discomfort of not knowing. You cannot rush this stage, you cannot skip it. You can only move through it slowly and with honesty. One of the most difficult aspects of outgrowing your past is confronting the quiet attachments you did not realize you held. You grieve the routines that made you feel safe. You grieve the beliefs that once gave you answers. You grieve the relationships built around a version of you that no longer feels accurate. Even when these attachments limited you, they also provided familiarity. Letting them go means stepping into a landscape where nothing is certain yet. And that uncertainty feels like standing in the dark. But darkness is not the enemy. Darkness is part of the process. It is the space where new roots form. It is the silence in which you can hear your deeper truth. It is the fertile ground in which your next self begins to grow. Rilke understood this intimately. He wrote, "I want to be with those who know secret things or else alone." When you are between selves, the people who can meet you in that space are rare. Most of the time, you walk through this transition in solitude, not because you are unloved, but because the inner world is not a place most people know how to hold. As you grieve the past, you may notice memories resurfacing unexpectedly, not to torment you, but to invite you into understanding. You might remember the ways you dimmed yourself to stay accepted. You might remember the dreams you abandoned because they felt too risky. You might remember the promises you made to yourself that you never kept. These memories request your attention. They are asking to be acknowledged, not repeated. Grief cleanses the inner world. It clears away the illusions you once needed. It reveals the truths you once avoided. It asks you to sit with your younger self and thank them for what they carried. It asks you to release them with tenderness rather than judgment. Outgrowing your past often means recognizing that your younger self did the best they could with the tools they had. They navigated their world with limited knowledge and limited courage, but they survived. And because they survived, you are here. You are able now to make choices that your younger self could not even imagine. Honoring them does not mean staying the same. It means continuing the journey they began. Sometimes the grief feels heavy because it signals the end of a story you once believed would shape your entire life. Perhaps you imagined a particular future that no longer feels aligned. Perhaps you held on to a version of success that now feels hollow. Perhaps you outgrew a relationship, a dream, a community, or an identity. Letting go of these stories does not mean they were meaningless. It means they were meaningful enough to change you. And because they changed you, you now require a new story. This process can create tension within you. One part wants to hold on, another part longs to move forward. You oscillate between nostalgia and possibility. You revisit old thoughts even as new insights emerge. You may feel as though you are taking steps backward, but these steps are part of the grieving. They are part of making peace with what was. They are part of granting yourself permission to move through the threshold of becoming. There is no single moment when this grief ends. It dissolves slowly like morning mist. It lifts as you begin to feel the contours of your emerging self. It softens as you notice the small ways your life is shifting toward greater honesty. It fades when you realize that you are no longer trying to fit back into the past. You are learning to inhabit the present. As you move further into the process, you may begin to sense a quiet spaciousness within you, a sense that something has been cleared out. This space can feel unfamiliar. At first, it might feel like emptiness, but emptiness is not a void. It is potential. It is the room your life needs in order to expand. When the past releases its hold, there is suddenly space for what comes next. Rilke wrote, "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us, long before it happens. This is the heart of the spaciousness you feel. The future is entering you quietly. It has not yet taken shape, but it is already beginning to move within you. This space is delicate. It asks for gentleness. It asks for patience. It asks you to trust that your inner life knows how to guide you. You do not need to fill this space immediately. You do not need to rush into new commitments or identities. Becoming is a slow unfolding. It cannot be forced. The next version of you will reveal itself gradually. Through small preferences, small desires, small moments of clarity, you may notice that certain conversations energize you while others drain you. You may notice that certain environments feel nourishing while others feel tight. You may notice that your body reacts differently to situations you used to tolerate. These signals are not random. They are the early language of your emerging self. As you listen to this language, your grief begins to transform. It becomes less of an ache and more of a remembrance, a quiet gratitude for what shaped you, a gentle acceptance of what no longer serves you, a recognition that letting go was not abandonment but necessary evolution. This evolution often leads to a new relationship with solitude. Solitude becomes less about withdrawal and more about presence. It becomes the space where you can hear your own thoughts without interference. It becomes the ground from which your new life begins to grow. Many people fear solitude because it reveals their inner world. But in this stage of growth, solitude feels like a homecoming. It feels like returning to yourself after being away for too long. Rilke encouraged solitude with unusual tenderness. Love your solitude and try to sing out with the pain it causes you. He understood that solitude is not always peaceful. Sometimes it aches, sometimes it feels like exposure. But if you stay with it, something inside you begins to shift toward clarity. As your inner life becomes clearer, you may also notice changes in your relationships. Some connections deepen because they have room to adapt to your growth. Others fade because they are rooted in your former self. This fading can be painful, but it is not a sign of failure. It is a natural consequence of becoming more authentic. Relationships built on pretense cannot survive honesty. Relationships built on shared growth can. You may also feel the grief of leaving behind versions of love that once felt necessary. The love you needed when you were younger may not be the love you need now. The people who supported your survival may not support your expansion. Letting go of these connections is not a rejection. It is an acknowledgement of truth. As you continue to outgrow your past, you may find yourself drawn toward new ways of living that you cannot yet articulate. You may feel a pull toward quieter experiences, toward meaningful conversations, toward slow mornings, toward new forms of creativity, toward environments that allow your inner world to breathe. These are signs of alignment. They are the early expressions of a self that is beginning to feel at home in its own skin. Sometimes this process brings old dreams back to life. Dreams you discarded because you felt unworthy. Dreams you suppressed because they did not fit the expectations placed upon you. As you grieve your past, some of these dreams return, not as demands but as invitations to revisit what once sparked your inner world before fear intervened. But not all old dreams are meant to be reclaimed. Some are meant to be thanked and released. They reflected who you were, not who you are becoming. The grief of outgrowing your past includes accepting that not everything can accompany you forward. Some paths end so that new ones can begin. In this acceptance, you begin to feel a new strength emerging. Not the strength of force, not the strength of denial, but the strength of honesty. The strength that comes from aligning your inner and outer life. The strength that comes from no longer pretending. This strength feels quiet, but it is steady. It is the kind of strength that allows you to walk into uncertainty without collapsing into fear. There is a moment in this process when you realize that your grief has changed shape. It no longer feels like loss, it feels like release. It feels like a door closing gently so that another can open. It feels like gratitude for what was and readiness for what is becoming. This readiness is not a loud declaration. It is a subtle internal shift, a softness, a willingness, a sense that you can finally breathe again. You realize that you are no longer trying to return to an older version of yourself. You're no longer mourning what could have been. You are slowly releasing the past so you can live in the present. Rilke captures this transition beautifully. And now we welcome the new year, full of things that have never been. You welcome the new year within yourself, the new chapter, the new truth, even before you understand what it contains. The grief of outgrowing your past leaves behind a new clarity. You begin to see your life with fresh eyes. You see your boundaries more clearly. You see your needs more honestly. You see the people who truly support your growth. You see the habits that nourish you and the ones that deplete you. You see the choices that align with your emerging self. This clarity is a gift. It is the quiet reward of your grief. It allows you to make decisions from a place of truth rather than fear. It allows you to choose what feels authentic rather than what feels familiar. It allows you to shape a life that reflects who you are becoming rather than who you were taught to be. As this clarity deepens, the world begins to feel different. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You engage with life from a new perspective. You listen more carefully. You speak more honestly. You move more deliberately. You allow yourself to feel without collapsing. You allow yourself to rest without guilt. You allow yourself to grow without apology. This is the quiet power that emerges after grief, not the power of dominance or certainty, but the power of alignment, the power of living in a way that feels true from the inside out. When you look back, you may not remember the exact moment your grief began, but you will remember the subtle ways your life started to shift. You will remember the nights when you felt alone, even in familiar company. You will remember the conversations that no longer resonated. You will remember the internal whispers urging you toward change. You will remember the courage it took to listen. Over time, the grief softens into understanding of who you were, who you are, and who you are becoming, understanding that growth requires letting go, understanding that outgrowing your past is not a rejection of it, but an evolution of it, understanding that the self is not static but constantly unfolding. Your future self will look back at this period with gratitude. They will see how much you had to release in order to expand. They will see how the grief that once felt heavy became the doorway to a deeper life. They will see that the discomfort you endured was the beginning of your becoming. Rilke wrote with quiet foresight, everything is gestation and then birthing. This is what you are in, a gestation, a quiet forming, a slow preparation for the next version of your life. And someday, when another transition arrives, you will recognize the signs. You will understand that the ache is not a warning, but an invitation. You will remember that grief is not the end. It is the space in which the next version of your life quietly begins. You outgrew your past because you were meant to. You are becoming someone new because your life requires it. And even though this process is tender, even though it is slow, even though it asks for more courage than you feel you possess, you are moving toward a version of yourself that feels more honest, more grounded, more whole. This is the quiet work of becoming. And you are already in the middle of it, so continue.